The shop foreman called me on a Monday morning. His name is Denny Ruiz. He never calls before 6. He said, "Gene, you need to come down here." I asked him what was wrong. He said, "Just come. And don't tell Trent you're coming." Then he hung up. I stood in my kitchen holding a dead phone. Something in my gut went tight. I didn't know it yet. That call would change everything. Welcome back to The Forgotten Father. Grab your coffee. Get comfortable. Remember this. The people in these stories had every chance to do right by the ones who raised them. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment. Be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to stay till the end. My name is Gene Whitfield. I'm 68 years old. I live outside Toledo, Ohio. Been here my whole life. Never wanted to be anywhere else. I drive a 1998 Ford F-150. The paint's gone chalky on the hood. I wear a gray work shirt with my name stitched on the pocket. My reading glasses have been taped at the hinge for 6 years. I never replaced them. Some things you keep on purpose. For 44 years I've worked the service counter at Whitfield Auto. I started as a shop sweeper. I worked my way up slow, one repair at a time. I write up tickets. I answer phones. I know every regular customer by their engine sound alone. Walk up to me in the parking lot. You'd hand me your car keys, not a company org chart. That's exactly how I like it. Quiet men get underestimated. Underestimated men get to watch everything. There's a mechanic in Bay 3 named Denny. He's worked here nearly as long as I have. He calls me boss as a joke, because everybody comes to me eventually anyway. A stuck alternator. A customer complaint. A part that never shipped. I helped Denny buy his first house, quietly, back in 2009. He's never forgotten it. Denny is the closest thing this shop has to an early warning system. If something's wrong, Denny knows before the paperwork does. My daughter Renee married a man named Trent Colby 8 years ago. Trent came from a business school, not a garage. He climbed fast inside the company. Within 5 years he was regional vice president over 11 locations. He wears a company polo tucked into pressed khakis. He calls me Gene in a tone that sounds like he's doing me a favor. It started small, with Trent. At Thanksgiving 2 years back, he asked me to move my truck because it didn't photograph well for a company holiday post. I moved it. Nobody else at that table saw anything wrong with that. At Renee's birthday last spring, he introduced me to his regional director as my father-in-law, still turning wrenches at 70. I was 67, close enough for him not to bother checking. At Christmas, Trent mentioned, in front of the whole family, that he'd always wondered why a man could run a shop counter for 40 years and never move up. Renee's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I told him some men aren't looking to move up from what they're good at. He said, "Sure, Gene," in the tone of a man agreeing with a child. I let it go. A man doesn't build a life keeping score on holiday dinners. Renee was 6 when I taught her to check her own oil in the shop bay. She stood on a milk crate, watching my hands like they were doing magic. She asked me once why I never wanted a fancier job, something with a title on a door. I told her titles don't fix anybody's transmission when it dies on the highway at midnight. She said that made sense to her. She was 6. It made more sense to her then than it seems to make to her husband now. I never minded being underestimated by Trent. Not until the regional awards banquet. Whitfield Auto throws this banquet every year. Regional managers fly in from 3 states. The hotel ballroom gets rented. The good centerpieces come out. Every top performer gets thanked by name. I wasn't invited that night, not officially. I was there because Denny told me to come. I stood near the back in my gray work shirt. Name tag crooked on my pocket. A glass of water in my hand. Trent took the microphone around 8:30. He thanked the regional managers. He thanked corporate. Then he pointed toward the back of the room, right at me. He said, "And let's hear it for our counter guys." Guys like Gene here, keeping the lights on since the Carter administration. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. Guys like Gene. Like I was a fixture. Like I was part of the centerpieces. Renee wasn't in the room. She'd stayed home with a sick kid. I don't think she knew he said it. I want to believe that. I clapped along like everyone else. Inside, something old and quiet woke up. I almost walked out right then. I got as far as my truck in the parking lot. Keys in the ignition, engine off, hands on the wheel. I sat there a long time. Part of me wanted to just drive home. Forget the whole night. Let Trent have his laugh, the way I'd let him have 100 small laughs before. I thought about calling it quits altogether. Retiring quiet. Letting the company be whatever Trent wanted it to be. Then I thought about a winter 41 years ago. A man named Harlan Voss, who taught me everything about engines and never once made me feel small for not finishing high school. I sat with that memory until it settled something in my chest. I turned the truck off completely. I walked back inside. Trent kept talking after I sat back down. He announced the company was restructuring regional service offerings ahead of a franchise buyout by a national chain called Trask Automotive Holdings. A $62 million deal, pending a final valuation. He said streamlining legacy programs twice. Regional managers nodded like that meant something good. I know what those words mean, coming from a man like Trent. They mean cutting whatever doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. I've watched men like him my whole career. They talk about efficiency the way a wolf talks about flock management. Confident, reasonable sounding, never once mentioning the sheep. I found Denny near the coat check after the speeches ended. He didn't smile at me. He said, "Gene, walk with me." We went to the loading dock out back. He pulled a folded printout from his jacket. He set it in front of me like it was something dangerous. He said, "Trent's restructuring plan ends the Veterans Service Program. All of it. Starting next quarter." I stood very still. Denny didn't rush me. He let the silence sit there as long as it needed to. That's one of the things I've always respected about him. He knows when a man needs a minute before he can talk. The Veterans Service Program gives free brake jobs, free tune-ups, and free tires to any veteran who walks through our doors. No paperwork, no questions, no upsell. It's been running for 32 years. Most people at the company think it's some old manufacturer incentive that phased out years ago. Most people don't know I fund it myself. I need to back up. 41 years ago, I came home from 2 tours with a bad knee and no plan. I had $11 to my name and a car that wouldn't start. A mechanic named Harlan Voss saw my old service jacket hanging in my back seat. He fixed the car for free, no questions, and then he offered me a job sweeping his floor. He never once mentioned the bill. I never forgot that a stranger's decency is the only reason I have a career at all. I spent the next decade learning the trade under Harlan. When he passed, he left the shop to me outright, no strings. I built it into 11 locations over 30 years, living plain, saving quiet. I named the Veterans Program simply the Service Program, vague enough that nobody connected the counter clerk who wrote up tickets to the man who'd founded and still majority owned the whole company through a family trust. I liked it that way. Decency shouldn't need applause. My lawyer, a woman named Paulette Marsh, wrote one clause into the ownership trust at my insistence, back when I first brought in outside investors. As founding trustee, I retain 61% control and veto power over any change to core company programs. Nobody at corporate reads founding trust documents from 30 years ago. Trent certainly hadn't. Denny looked at me on that loading dock. He said, "Gene, does he know?" I said no. He said, "Are you going to tell him?" I said, "Not yet. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it. It costs you nothing. It means everything to us." Thank you. Genuinely, I went home that night. I told my wife Carol everything. She's 66 now, still sharp enough to win the church raffle every single year on instinct alone. She listened without interrupting, which for Carol is its own kind of alarm bell. When I finished, she said, "So Trent wants to cut off veterans for a buyout bonus." I said, "That's the shape of it." She said, "And he called you a fixture in front of 200 people." I said, "He did." She said, "Well, I hope he enjoys the surprise." Then she went back to her book, like we'd just discussed the weather. I didn't sleep much that week. I called Paulette Marsh first thing Monday. She's handled my paperwork for 22 years and doesn't rattle easy. I told her what I'd found. She went quiet, which for Paulette is rare. Then she asked one question. "You want to stop it quiet or stop it loud?" I told her I wanted it stopped for good, and I wanted Trent to understand exactly why, in a room he couldn't spin his way out of. She said, "Then we do this at the shareholder review. On the record, full board present." Over the next 5 weeks I did what I've always done. I stayed quiet. I got organized. Paulette pulled the original trust documents, notarized copies, the whole paper trail going back 3 decades. I met with an independent auditor named Felix Ochoa downtown, someone with no ties to Trask Automotive. He read through everything twice, slower the second time, and told me my controlling stake was airtight under current law. It was. I met Felix Ochoa in a small office above a diner on Adams Street. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with a laptop covered in inspection stickers. He spread the trust documents across his desk. He read the controlling clause twice, out loud. Slower the second time. He looked up at me and said, "Mr. Whitfield, do you understand what you're holding here?" I said I thought so. He said, "You're holding the only thing in this entire company that Trask's lawyers can't out-argue." He said the clause was airtight, drafted clean. No ambiguity a corporate attorney could exploit. I asked him what I should do with it. He said, "Nothing, yet. Let Trent build the whole case for cutting that program. Let him put it in writing, in a boardroom, on the record. Then you use it once, and you use it right." 2 weeks before the vote, the Trask Automotive team toured our main location. 4 of them in matching gray blazers. Clipboards in hand. They walked the bays like they already owned them. Trent led the tour personally. He walked them straight past the veterans' intake counter, no stopping. Past the wall of thank you letters from soldiers' families. One of the suits asked what that counter was for. Trent said, "Legacy service line, being reassessed." I was restocking brake pads nearby. None of them looked up at me twice. I finished the shelf. I went back to my truck. I sat there a minute, just breathing. I asked Paulette to schedule the restructuring vote in front of the full shareholder board. No shortcuts. No private sign-off. Trent, thinking it was a formality, agreed right away. I kept working my regular shifts through all of it. I wrote up tickets. I answered phones. Denny brought me coffee every morning and asked why I looked like a man carrying something heavy. I told him it was nothing, and he gave me a look that said he didn't believe me for a second, but he let it go, because that's what Denny does. Trent walked past me twice that month. He said morning, Gene both times, same tone as always. Like I was a fixture that happened to speak. 2 weeks before that, Renee had mentioned Trent was under a lot of pressure lately. I hadn't asked why. I regret that now. A father should ask why, even when the answer is complicated. Renee called me on a Sunday. She said Trent had been stressed, working late, talking about a big opportunity that would set them up for good. I asked if she knew what the opportunity was. She said something about a franchise sale, nothing specific. I asked if she was doing all right. She said she was tired, but happy. I didn't tell her what I knew. Some things a father protects for as long as he can. The shareholder review landed on a Thursday afternoon, same hotel ballroom as the banquet, 5 weeks earlier. 9 board members. Paulette as counsel. Trent at the podium with a slide deck, the Trask Automotive Holdings logo glowing in the corner. I sat in the back row again. Gray work shirt. Name tag on my pocket. Same seat as always. Nobody in that room expected me to say a single word. Trent walked through his plan. Ending the Veterans Service Program would save the company $1.8 million a year in unbilled service work. That would clear the books ahead of the Trask valuation. He said it would let the buyout close at the full $62 million instead of a reduced offer. He said, the numbers simply make more sense this way. Like arithmetic could excuse what it actually meant. A board member near the window, a woman named Constance Felt, asked what happens to veterans currently enrolled. Trent said they'd be transitioned to a discount referral network. Constance asked which network. Specifically, Trent said his team was still finalizing that mapping. Everyone in that room knew what that phrase meant. Nobody said it out loud. Paulette stood up. She said, "Before this vote proceeds, there's a matter of standing I need to raise." She looked at me. She said, "Whitfield Auto's ownership trust grants controlling authority and a program veto to its founding trustee. That trustee is in this room." Trent laughed. Actually laughed, before he understood what she meant. He said, "Paulette, the founder's been retired for years. There's no active trustee involvement." Paulette slid the notarized documents across the table. She said, "The founding trustee is Gene Whitfield." The room went quiet in a way I've only heard once before. The winter Harlan Voss handed me the keys to his shop. Trent turned around in his chair. He looked at me the way you look at a check engine light you've been ignoring for months. I stood up. I walked to the front of the room, past the slide deck with its clean bar charts, past the Trask Automotive logo glowing on the screen. I said, "My name is Gene Whitfield. I've worked this counter for 44 years. I wrote up the very first service ticket this company ever printed." I let that sit a second. Then I said, 41 years ago, a mechanic fixed my car for free when I had $11 to my name. He gave me a trade and a chance nobody owed me. I built this program so no veteran would ever have to depend on luck, the way I did." Trent's face had gone the color of the printout Denny handed me on the loading dock. He said, "Gene, I didn't know." I said, "No, you didn't." I said, "You called me guys like Gene in front of 200 people. You never once wondered who I actually was." I said, "That's not an accident, that's a habit. You don't ask questions about people you've already decided don't matter." I turned to the board. I said, "As founding trustee, I am formally exercising my veto over the elimination of the Veterans Service Program." I said, "That program stays fully funded, exactly as it has for 32 years. Then I looked at the Trask Automotive logo on the screen. I said, "If this buyout needs $1.8 million taken out of veterans' break jobs to make the math work, then this company doesn't need this buyout." I said, "Find $62 million somewhere that isn't a soldier's tires." Constance asked Trent directly whether his personal bonus was tied to the valuation number. Trent said the structure was standard industry practice. He didn't say no. Another board member asked when he'd learned about my controlling stake. Trent said he hadn't known until that moment. Constance asked whether he'd read the trust documents before proposing the cut at all. Trent didn't answer that one. His silence answered every question better than any word could have. Nobody clapped. Nobody laughed. Paulette closed her folder. The quiet click sounded louder than applause. The board voted 8-1 against ending the program. Trent was the one. Denny wasn't allowed in the ballroom. He was waiting in the hallway with 2 other mechanics when the doors opened. Word travels fast at Whitfield Auto. He told me later that Constance Felt walked out first. Constance stopped in front of the 3 of them. She said only, "The program stays funded. Ask Gene Whitfield about it sometime." Denny said he had to lean against the wall for a minute. He said he'd known me 19 years and never once suspected. I told him that was rather the point of the whole arrangement. The morning after the vote, I got to the shop at 6 like always. I made coffee in the break room, same chipped mug, same instant grounds. A young mechanic I'd never spoken to before stopped in the doorway. He said, "Are you Mr. Whitfield?" "The owner?" I said I was. He said his uncle had gotten free breaks through the program 3 years back, after losing his job. He said he just wanted to shake my hand. I shook it. Then I went and restocked the oil filter shelf, because that shelf had been half empty for a week, and it wasn't going to fill itself just because a board vote happened. Within a month, the board opened a review into how the Trask automotive deal had been structured. They wanted to know if Trent's bonus depended on the program ending. It did. Trent resigned as regional vice president before the review concluded. Nobody forced him out in public. I made sure of that. I didn't want a spectacle. I wanted the program safe, and the truth on record. I got both. Renee called me that same week. She was furious, but not at me. She said, "Dad, why didn't you tell me any of this? Not the trust, not the program, not what he was planning." I told her the truth. I said I didn't know how to tell my own daughter that her husband would cut off veterans for a bonus. I said I didn't know how she'd take hearing it from me instead of seeing it herself. She was quiet a long moment. Then, she said, "You should have trusted me sooner." She was right. I told her so. Trent tried calling me twice, in the weeks after. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message was an apology, stiff and rehearsed, the kind a man writes down before he says it. The second was shorter. He just said, "I hope Renee's okay." I didn't call him back either time. Some apologies are for the person giving them, not the person receiving them. I let him have that one on his own. Trent and Renee separated 4 months later. I didn't push for that. I never said a word against him to her, not once, even when I had every right to. Some things a father has to let his daughter arrive at on her own. She arrived at it faster than I expected, once the numbers went public. Veterans at the shop started thanking her by name at pickup, not knowing she'd been married to the man who almost took it from them. Denny still brings me coffee every morning. He told me, weeks later, that half the mechanics had known something was wrong for months. They just didn't know it was this. He said, "Should have known you were the one holding it all up, boss." I told him the tickets don't write themselves either. He laughed harder than the joke deserved. The Veterans Service Program is still running. It served over 600 veterans last year. No bills, no questions. Paulette had a small plaque installed by the service counter a few weeks after the vote. It doesn't say company estate anymore. It says, simply, founded in gratitude, maintained in quiet. I still write up tickets. I still wear the gray shirt. Trent, when I see him now, mostly at Renee's place picking up paperwork, nods and says Gene instead of the old tone. It's a small thing. It cost him something to learn it. I let him keep the dignity of learning it quietly, the same way I kept my own dignity quiet for 32 years. Carol asked me, the night after the vote, whether I felt vindicated. I told her I mostly just felt tired and hungry and glad it was over. She made me meatloaf, the same one she's made every hard Thursday for 40 years. We ate at our kitchen table. My taped-up reading glasses sat on the counter, right where they always sit. She said, "You know, for a man who spent 32 years hiding how much company he owned, you sure do keep taped-up glasses." I told her some things you keep on purpose. She said that was the most Gene Whitfield sentence I'd ever spoken. Then she went back to her book. Denny still brings coffee every morning, still complaining about his back. Paulette still runs shareholder reviews with the same quiet precision she always has. The Veterans Service Program still has its lights on every day at the counter, the same counter I wrote tickets at for 44 years, 11 years before anyone in that ballroom found out who I really was. Renee works the front desk some Saturdays now, by choice, filling in when they're short-staffed. She told me last month a young veteran asked her why the plaque by the counter said founded in gratitude. Renee said she told him because someone once got help when he had nothing, and he never forgot it. The veteran asked if she knew who that someone was. Renee said she told him better than anyone. She didn't tell him it was her own father. Some things you let people find out slowly, the way I did. Felix Ochoa still audits our books every spring. He told me once, off the record, that most companies he reviews would have folded the veterans program in year one. He said margins don't usually survive that kind of generosity. I told him ours wasn't built to maximize margins. It was built to keep a promise. He said that was the first time in 20 years of auditing that a client had ever said something like that to him and meant it. People ask me sometimes if I regret staying quiet for 32 years. I don't. Quiet built the program. Quiet kept the promise. Quiet let one mechanic's decency turn into 600 veterans a year, instead of one lucky kid with a broken-down car. Loud gets you noticed. Quiet gets things done. I learned that a long time before Trent ever learned my name. A reporter from the Toledo paper called Paulette's office, asking for an interview with the mystery owner. Paulette asked me if I wanted to talk to them. I said no. She told the reporter the owner preferred to remain private and that the story was really about the veterans the program serves, not about him. The paper ran it that way. One paragraph, no name, no photo. I read it once at my kitchen table and folded it into a drawer. Some things don't need my face attached to them. They just need to keep working. Paulette told me later that Constance Felt pulled her aside after the vote. Constance said she'd sat on that board 6 years. She said she'd never once seen a restructuring proposal actually stopped. Not delayed. Not softened. Stopped cold. She asked Paulette how long she'd known who I was. Paulette said, longer than I was allowed to say. Constance laughed at that, the first laugh anyone had managed all afternoon. She said she was going to start looking a lot closer at every man behind a service counter she passed from now on. Paulette told her that was probably a good policy in general. Some men build empires to prove something. I built mine to repay something. There's a difference, and it's the only difference that ever mattered to me. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this family.